I had walked over to the edge of my lake, thinking that I would get a drink of water. By the time I arrived at the water's edge, my hands were killing me. They were aching just like my feet were when I was up on the mountain standing in the ice water. I couldn't understand this. I looked down at the load of snow I was carrying, and I noticed that most of it was gone. What was left was very wet, and some of it collected in my hands, and it looked like water. I put the remaining snow down on the ground and took a long drink from my lake. I was really thirsty. My hands still hurt, but not as bad. After a while, the hurt went away. I looked down at my remaining snow and was shocked to see that it was even smaller than it was before. I also noticed that the snow was surrounded by a very tiny body of water. I then leaned over and took a sip from this tiny body of water. This water tasted like river water and like lake water. I decided that I needed to think about this for a few moments. The snow that I carried down from the top of the mountain was the same snow that had a river flow out of it. That river flowed down the mountain and went into the lake. The lake tasted like fresh water, which was just like my river water. So bringing snow from the top of the mountain down to my valley seemed to turn the snow into fresh water. Because of this, I decided to come up with some names to describe these things. I think I will call snow that turns into water melting. I think I will call the small body of water that came from the melting snow a puddle. I then thought about the way my feet had felt when I was high up in the mountain, especially when I stood in the river. I also thought about how my hands had felt after I came back down to the valley carrying my snow, but the snow was melting. I decided to call the way my feet felt and my hands felt cold. When I was high on the mountain, my feet were cold. Down here in the valley, my feet are no longer cold, but snow melts. As I was coming down the mountain, the snow in my hand began to melt, and that made my hands cold. After I put the snow down, my hands began to feel better. They were no longer cold. Now that I'm back down here in my valley, I feel totally normal. I need a name to describe how I feel, so I decided to call it warm. Again, I looked at the puddle that came from the snow I brought down from the mountain. Down here in the warm valley, the snow melted and made water. The top of the mountain was covered with snow. A river was coming from under the snow. So, the snow must be melting on the top of the mountain, and that makes the river. Finally, I leaned over and took a drink from the puddle again. This time I noticed that the water that melted from the snow was cold, just like it was on top of the mountain. So this means that a warm valley melts snow, and melted snow makes cold water. I then thought about the water in the lake. That water was not cold, like the water on top of the mountain or the water in the puddle. The lake is down here in my valley, which is warm. So warm valleys must keep water warm. So I guess that means if something is cold and it is exposed to something warm, the cold thing will become warm. I decided to wait around until all the snow in the puddle melted. After all the snow had melted, I waited around a little longer. Then I bent over and took another drink from the puddle. This time, I noticed that the puddle had become warmer. This definitely means that warm valleys, when exposed to cold puddles, will turn the cold puddle warm. Finally, I thought once again about all the snow that was high up on the top of the mountain. Snow only seems to last if it's cold, so it must get colder the higher you go up on the mountain. As I walked down the mountain, I came closer to my valley. My valley is warm, so as you go down a mountain, it must get warmer. After having thought about the warm and cold discoveries I had made today, I next thought about the time that I've used up. It had taken me approximately 2 hours to walk from my potato cellar to this lake. It had taken me another hour to walk around the lake and then follow the river up the mountain to the snow. I had spent about 1 hour at the top of the mountain studying the snow. It had taken me another hour to walk down the mountain following the river and back around the lake. I estimate that I spent about an hour waiting by the lake here while the snow I brought down the mountain finished melting. So if I use my primitive math skills, I figure I've already used about 6 hours of today's 10 hours of daylight. It is going to take me about 2 hours to walk from the lake back to my potato cellar. So I might have another 2 hours of exploration time available to me.